Hello world, today we're going to write a Perl program that will generate the files necessary for a C++ project. I wrote this program because I realized that I was spending a lot of time writing the basic coding of classes and the main driver program, sometimes as much as a half hour or even more. And I realized I could just put these into a template and have the computer generate them for me if I just told them the names of the classes. Alright, so let's get started. We always start a Perl program with the shebang. And after that, this first line here, die, usage 0, project name if argv is less than 1. If we don't have any command line arguments added to our program in the command line, it just dies, it kills itself. Then we get our command line arguments. Project name is the first argument in the command line. Then we have two empty lists that we're going to fill with our classes. We use two lists because we're going to have to cycle through both of the lists at the same time. Then we enter a for loop, push each of the command line arguments into our lists. Okay, this variable right here is the path for our C++ project. This is an absolute path. You'll need to edit this on your own depending on how you have your computer set up. On Linux, we always have the home folder, and each user has their own individual home folder. This is mine. And then after that, then I have these two folders that I have designated for my C++ projects, and we're going to end up creating a new folder with the name of the project, which we got from the command line there. Text editor variable. I like to use Kate. This is my text editor of choice. It is a very powerful text editor. It has a lot of features and it looks an awful lot like an integrated development environment. Perhaps the big difference between that is Kate is separate from a lot of the IDE code in that it will not compile the program for you, but it will give you access to the command line and you can enter the parameters you need to compile the program. Then we have a couple more variables that just include where we are going to save our files for the C++ project. And then I'll have to explain this to you a little bit. In our CPP folder, where we have our projects, and I'll look in this example here. This is just an example project. You open it up, we have a main folder and a SRC folder for the source files. So this is the source files. These hold the source files here. We have a Perl program that'll compile them for us. And then we have our main file. And this is a backup file that we have here that was generated by the text editor. And then a main folder will have the binary program that we use in Linux. So we're going to get a variable with local time. This gets the date and the time. I like to put this on all of my programs, put a timestamp on there. Then we're going to make some directories or we're going to kill the program. If we can't make the directory for our project, we're going to kill the program because we can't make it. The same with the main folder and the source folder. Then we're going to do a system command with this cp utility. We're going to copy this compile.pl, this Perl program that we had written in a previous video, and we're going to copy it to our source folder here. Now, if you have not seen my previous video on how to write this program right here, I highly encourage you to go back and watch it and create the program. It will help you out tremendously when you're compiling your projects. Alright, then we're going to change the focus of the Perl program to where we're focused on the source code folder, the source code subdirectory, because we're going to start writing some files. This is the code we're going to use for our main driver program, the main.cpp. We're going to have our main function. See that there, int main, with our command line arguments. Okay, and we're going to start with that timestamp that I had mentioned earlier. Now, for these next two lines right here, oftentimes I have to port my programs to Windows, and when I use Windows, I write software using Visual Studio. Visual Studio will not compile a C++ program unless it sees this at the top of every single C++ file that it has to compile. This one right here also has some useful functions that are used in Windows, but it has no use in Linux. So we just comment both of those lines out when we generate the file. The rest are all standard header files that are available on Linux and Windows. Then this for loop right here, we're going to generate our headers for each and every class that we got from the command line. Notice for each header that we have for our classes for headers list here, we're just going to put a new include statement. Close the file, the main CPP file. Then we start writing our classes. So for each class that we have, we're going to start by getting a variable with an uppercase class name. That's what this UC function does. We open up our class.h header file, and then we say if not defined, that uppercase class name with that at the end of it. We have to separate this out with a period, otherwise it'll say it's a variable of its own that we haven't initialized. And if this is not defined, we will define it. And then we put our timestamp and our standard application frameworks, etc., all those header files. And we're looping through both of the lists of classes. Notice we start one loop up here and we start the other loop here, so that we're including all the classes in each header file. And the rest of the class header, we're just printing out a stub of our class. We're going to have our class name here. You're going to write your private variables there when you get around to it, and your public variables and your public member functions go down here. We define a default constructor, we define a copy constructor, and even a destructor. And this is where you're going to write your accessors and mutator methods when you're working on the project. And we close the header file with an end if. We'll get compile errors if we don't include this with our header file. Alright, now we need to write a CPP file for the header file that we just wrote. To correspond with it, we're defining our classes. This is where we define our default constructor, our default copy constructor, and also the destructor here. And as you create new accessors and mutator methods, you're going to include them in your file down here below the destructor. Alright, now we're going to change the focus of our program to the C++ source directory. What we're going to do, we're going to start our text editor here soon, because, well, we just generated this C++ project. Presumably we want to edit it, so we'll get on that right away. So we're going to collect a list of all the files that we had just created, and then for each file that we have in the list, we're going to store them in this empty list here, if it's pertinent. And it should be pertinent. This is just error checking in case something goes wrong. This chomp function removes the new line character at the end of this variable right here. If the file has a .h in it or has a .cpp, then presumably it's a C++ file, and we're going to put it on our list of files that we're going to open up. And here, our files for the text editor, we're going to join all these files with a space, and we're just making a big long string that we're going to put into a command line option. And here we make a system call to our text editor of choice, which was Kate in my case, and then we're going to open the files. And that should be all of it. We'll save our program, close it out, and now let's run it. We're going to open a terminal here. Bring this down a little bit. Perl, create C++ project, and we'll call the project my project. And follow with class names. Class 1, class 2, class 3. Okay, that should be enough for an example. Okay, so we have our text editor, Kate, opened up, It opened up all these files that we can edit them. We can have multiple windows. We can open our header file in one window and our CPP file in another. And if we forget, well, hey, what did we call that variable that we wanted to use right here in the constructor or one of these other member functions? We can just look over here in the header file and say, oh, right here. It's right there in the private member variables. So let's see if all the code we generated was valid. Let's give it a shot. Let's just make a simple hello world program just to test it. Cout blarg foo dot schmiggity who we'll save it and then let's compile it. Perl compile. blargfoo.schmiggity-who, which is exactly what we wanted our program to output. There we have it. It compiled perfectly. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was helpful. Happy programming.